Возьмите пример с Израиля. Израиль никогда так не делает. Он всегда борется до конца. И благодаря этому существует. Да и другого выбора нет. Надо бороться.
Brexit would mean the EU losing one of its strongest opponents of Russian influence in Europe, says analyst Peter Kreko via Skype.
So it's partially about disintegrating the European Union as a whole and destabilizing it. On the other hand, this is also about Great Britain, which is one of the fiercest critics of Vladimir Putin's Russia.
It's increasingly evident that hopes for a two-state solution are almost dead. At the same time, polls among Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza are showing that they're increasingly in favor of a one-state solution with equal rights for Israelis and Palestinians alike and equal citizenship. Is that something you believe could happen, or is that something you support?
I think if that happens, then that would be the end of the state of Israel. And I support Israel's right to exist. And I support Israel's right to exist. And I support Israel.
Let me tell you, number one, Putin loves Israel. And I heard this from him before he got to know Netanyahu. He came here, he was invited to Israel when he was deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, at that time Leningrad. He visited the country. He came back home and he told his wife, we are taking a trip to Israel. I want our kids to see how people were able to turn a desert into a land of milk and honey. And he said he took his family and traveled Israel from north to south, from Matula till Beersheba, till Eilat. He really went and saw everything. And he was really impressed for what he saw. And he says, it's something that we can learn from. That's number one. Number two, you have over 1 million Russian-speaking Jews living in Israel. That's a very strong connection with Russia. He feels that this is a strong bridge that can help. Number three, I think Israel has been a good friend to Russia. If you look today, what's going on in the world, sanctions and all of that, Israel has shown that, their friendship is strong, and I think that was an important message. I also think he realizes that mistakes that were made through the Soviet regime, to stand up and help the Arab countries against Israel was a political mistake and doesn't make any sense. So I think adding up all these points, plus I think he likes strong leaders. I think Bibi is one of them. But he has liked Sharon, and he loved Peres. I remember many different events when we were sitting together. And he really, I think he has shown to many countries that if you are friendly with Russia, Russia will be friendly with you. And Israel was able to show that.
I accept what you say, Chief Rabbi, and yet it worries us here in Israel that we also see Putin supporting Assad in Syria and the Iranian regime, and we wonder how things actually work in reality. How can you support both sides of a conflict? And especially the situation in Syria, which is so tragic, and Russia has such a key role in the region. Do you see it as positive or a negative thing that he seems to be playing both sides?
So I'm not so well versed in everything that's going on in Syria. I know a few things that I can mention here. Number one, there's practically a daily briefing coming from Russia to Israel, Israel to Russia, about what's going on in Syria. the defense minister in Russia has been in touch with Israel on many, many different issues. And Putin does believe, and he said this many different times at different events, even in the community, that Syria with Assad right now is better for Israel than Syria without Assad.
Уважаемый господин президент, уважаемые друзья, все, что я здесь увидел, и то, что сейчас услышал, производит на меня очень сильное эмоциональное впечатление. Укрепляет чувство глубокого уважения к евреям, к еврейскому народу, к народу Израиля.
Is going on right now. Are they interested in a government centered out of Israel, out of Jerusalem?
Well, that's the idea. That's what the state of Israel is set up for. That's the ancient crossroads of the world.
And one of the things that happened when I was on the radio last week was I began to mention a group of Kabbalists, a specific group. And boy, when I did that, all hell broke loose.
Oh, yeah.
For me and for others. And that was this group called the Shabbat Lubavitch.
Oh, yes.
Now, what do you know about the Shabbat Lubavitch?
Very little, because, they work behind the scenes. They stay out of sight. You only hear about the Lubavitch up in the New York area, and in Israel itself sometimes. But they don't have any public relations agents whatsoever.
Are they the real guys, the real people behind the throne?
Oh, yeah. They're the manipulators. They pull the strings.
And even with the bankers, the banking arm is what I've discovered is that the banking arm of the Rothschilds and the banking arm of Warburg and even the Federal Reserve is the political arm, and then these rabbis are the kind of the brains behind it, or the spiritual arm. And there's kind of two camps within this hydra here. It's a two-headed hydra, I think.
Oh, yes, it's a two-headed hydra.
Well,
they have different functions throughout the system, but they're all working. And they managed to work together.
They have managed to work together, and there is truth somewhere that they've created the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations. They've created the Illuminati group. They've actually supported Freemasonry over time. But those are just sub-organizations of these people, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, they're different manifestations, but they're all working toward the same goal.
In 1984, when I was appointed Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, I visited the great rabbi of Lubavitch,